My family is taking me to court for custody of my baby, for something they orchestrated themselves, but they have no idea about the evidence I've been quietly gathering all along. When I found out I was pregnant at 22 years old, living in a cramped studio apartment in Portland, Oregon, I never imagined my own flesh and blood would become my greatest adversaries. The rain was particularly heavy that October morning when the pregnancy test showed those two pink lines. And as I stared at them through tears, I had no idea that this tiny life growing inside me would become the center of a family war that would test every ounce of strength I possessed. My name is Emma, and this is the story of how I fought to keep my son when everyone I should have been able to trust conspired to take him away. It started innocently enough, or so I thought at the time. My older sister, Rebecca, 34 years old and married to a successful corporate attorney named Michael, had been trying to conceive for 7 years. She had the perfect house in Lake Oswego, the kind with the manicured lawn and the 3-car garage. The kind of place where children ride their bikes in cul-de-sacs and mothers host book clubs on Thursday afternoons. Rebecca had everything planned out since we were children, always the one with the color-coded calendars and 5-year plans, while I was the one who dropped out of college to work at a small bookstore cafe downtown, content with my simple life and dreams of maybe writing a novel someday. The first signs of what was to come appeared at Thanksgiving dinner, just weeks after I'd announced my pregnancy to the family. I remember the way the candlelight flickered across the dining room table as my mother, Patricia, 61 years old with perfectly styled silver hair, cleared her throat and began what I now recognize as the opening salvo in their campaign. She spoke in that measured tone she used when she had thought she was being reasonable, the same voice she'd used to convince me to give up art classes in high school because they weren't practical. "Emma, darling," she said, passing the cranberry sauce with deliberate slowness, "have you really thought this through? Being a single mother is incredibly challenging, especially at your age and in your financial situation." I felt my hand instinctively move to my still flat belly as I tried to keep my voice steady. "I know it won't be easy, Mom, but I'm committed to doing this. I've already started looking into assistance programs and I'm picking up extra shifts at the cafe." The bookstore owner, Mrs. Chen, had been incredibly supportive, even offering to let me bring the baby to work once they were old enough. But my mother's expression suggested this wasn't the answer she was hoping for. That's when Rebecca leaned forward, her diamond earrings catching the light, and I noticed the way she and my mother exchanged a quick glance, the kind of wordless communication that made me feel like an outsider in my own family. "Emma, sweetie," she said, her voice dripping with a sweetness that didn't reach her eyes. "Michael and I have been talking, and we want you to know that we're here for you. We could help you so much more than any government program. You could move in with us during the pregnancy, we'd cover all your medical expenses, make sure you have the best care possible." At first, I was touched by what seemed like genuine concern. My relationship with Rebecca had always been complicated, shadowed by my parents' obvious favoritism toward their firstborn, but I thought maybe this baby could bring us closer together. "Thank you, Becca. That's really generous," I replied, though something in my chest tightened with an instinct I couldn't quite name. But I want to stay independent. It's important to me. The conversation shifted after that, but I noticed things I hadn't before. The way Rebecca's hand lingered on her empty wine glass, the slight tremor in her fingers. The way Michael kept checking his phone, his jaw tense. The way my father, Robert, usually the peacemaker, remained unusually silent, pushing his green beans around his plate like a child avoiding vegetables. Even my youngest brother, Daniel, 25 and usually quick with a joke to diffuse family tension, seemed subdued, shooting me concerned glances across the table. It was 3 weeks later when Rebecca showed up at my apartment unannounced. I was in the middle of a particularly severe bout of morning sickness, still in my pajamas at 2 in the afternoon, when her familiar knock echoed through my small space. She let herself in with the spare key I'd given her years ago, carrying a bag from the expensive organic grocery store across town and wearing her work clothes. A pristine cream-colored suit that probably cost more than I made in a month. "Oh, honey, look at you," she said, setting the groceries on my tiny kitchen counter and surveying my disheveled state with what looked like genuine concern. "This is exactly what I was worried about. You can barely take care of yourself right now. How are you going to manage with a baby?" Her words stung, but there was something else in her tone. Something calculating that made me straighten despite my nausea. "I'm fine, Becca. It's just morning sickness. It'll pass." I moved to the kitchen sink, splashing cold water on my face, trying to compose myself. But she was already unpacking the groceries, filling my nearly empty fridge with things I could never afford. Organic prenatal smoothies, grass-fed beef, vegetables I didn't even recognize. When she turned back to me, there were tears in her eyes, and for a moment I saw my big sister, the one who used to braid my hair and tell me stories when thunderstorms kept me awake. Emma, I need to tell you something, she said, sinking onto my secondhand couch. Michael and I got the test results back last week. It's definitive. I can't have children. The words hung in the air between us, heavy with years of disappointment and monthly heartbreak. My uterus is... She trailed off, waving her hand as if the medical details didn't matter. The point is, it's never going to happen for us naturally, and we've exhausted our insurance coverage for IVF. Adoption could take years, and the agencies are so particular about everything. I sat beside her, my own discomfort forgotten as I watched her carefully composed facade crack just slightly. I'm so sorry, Becca. I know how much you wanted this, and I meant it. Despite our complicated relationship, I knew that motherhood had been her dream since we were children, playing with dolls in our shared bedroom. Her baby dolls always perfectly dressed, while mine were usually naked and covered in marker scribbles. That's when she turned to me, gripping my hands with an intensity that made me uncomfortable. But this could be perfect, Emma. Don't you see? You're young. You have your whole life ahead of you. You could have other children when you're ready, when you're married, when you can provide properly for them. But this baby, my voice trailed off as the implications of what she was suggesting began to dawn on me. She must have seen the shock on my face because she quickly continued, her words tumbling out faster now. We could do a private adoption. It would all be legal, of course. We'd cover all your expenses, medical bills, everything. You could even stay with us until the birth if you wanted. We'd make sure you're comfortable, and afterward, well, you could go back to school, pursue your dreams. We could even help with that, pay for your education. Think of it as giving your baby the best possible life. I pulled my hands away, standing up too quickly, making my head spin. You want me to give you my baby? The words came out sharper than I intended, but the hurt that flashed across her face was quickly replaced by something harder. I want you to think about what's best for everyone involved, she said, standing as well, smoothing invisible wrinkles from her skirt. You're working minimum wage, living in this place. She gestured around my studio apartment with barely concealed disdain. You have no support system besides family. The father isn't in the picture. How are you going to provide everything a child needs? Private schools, college, music lessons, sports? The opportunities Michael and I could give this child? The father was Tyler, my ex-boyfriend who'd made it crystal clear he wanted nothing to do with the pregnancy. He'd actually offered me $500 to, as he so delicately put it, take care of the problem. When I refused, he'd signed away his parental rights faster than you could say deadbeat dad, probably relieved to wash his hands of the whole situation. But that was my business, my decision, my consequence to bear. I think you should leave, I said quietly, opening the door. Rebecca gathered her purse, but paused at the threshold. Just think about it, Emma. Really think about it, for the baby's sake. Then she was gone, leaving me with a fridge full of expensive groceries and a growing sense of dread. The campaign began in earnest after that. My mother called daily, each conversation peppered with stories about young mothers who'd made the selfless choice to give their babies better lives. She'd forward me articles about the challenges of single parenthood, the statistics on children raised without fathers, the financial burden of raising a child alone. Did you know it costs over $200,000 to raise a child to 18? She'd say, as if I hadn't already done the math 100 times in my head. My father, usually content to let my mother handle family matters, suddenly became interested in my life. He'd invite me to lunch, just the two of us, something that hadn't happened since I was in middle school. Over sandwiches at the deli near his office, he'd talk about responsibility and making hard choices. Your sister has everything ready, he mentioned once, stirring sugar into his coffee with unnecessary focus. They've already decorated a nursery, yellow and green, gender neutral. There's a crib that converts into a toddler bed, one of those fancy monitors that tracks breathing. They've thought of everything. The pressure intensified as my pregnancy progressed. At 20 weeks, when I found out I was having a boy, Rebecca's desperation became almost palpable. She showed up at my ultrasound appointment, despite my explicitly telling her I wanted to go alone. I've been reading about prenatal bonding, she announced in the waiting room, loud enough for other patients to hear. It's important for all caregivers to be present at these milestones. The ultrasound technician looked confused when Rebecca tried to hold my hand during the scan, when she gasped and cried at the sight of the baby's profile on the screen. That's our baby boy, she whispered. and something cold settled in my stomach that had nothing to do with the gel on my skin. The technician caught my eye, a question in her expression, but I just shook my head slightly. I didn't have the energy to explain that the woman crying beside me was already planning a life with my child that didn't include me. The situation reached a new level of intensity when Rebecca and Michael presented me with adoption papers at what I thought was going to be a family dinner. It was a Sunday evening in March, rain pattering against the windows of my parents' house, the same dining room where 6 months earlier I'd announced my pregnancy. But this time, instead of food on the table, there was a stack of legal documents and a pen. "We had our lawyer draw these up," Michael said in his courtroom voice, the one I imagined he used to intimidate witnesses. "It's all very straightforward. Open adoption so you could still see him on holidays and birthdays. We're offering a very generous compensation package for your pain and suffering, plus covering all medical expenses and 6 months of living expenses post-birth to help you get back on your feet." I stared at the papers, the legal language swimming before my eyes. Termination of parental rights, irrevocable consent, best interests of the child. My hands were shaking as I pushed the stack back across the table. "I'm not signing anything," I said, my voice stronger than I felt. "This is my son we're talking about, not a business transaction." Rebecca's composure finally cracked completely. "You're being selfish," she screamed, standing so abruptly her chair toppled backward. "Do you know what I've been through? 7 years, Emma. 7 years of trying, of hoping, of having my heart broken every single month. Dozens of negative pregnancy tests, 3 miscarriages, 5 rounds of IVF that left me feeling like a science experiment. And you get pregnant by accident with someone who doesn't even want you or the baby. And you're going to keep him just to, what, prove a point?" Michael tried to calm her, but she shook him off, her face flushed and tears streaming. "You could give me this one thing, Emma. This one thing, after everything I've done for you, all the times I've helped you, covered for you with mom and dad, lent you money you never paid back, you owe me this." "I don't owe you my child," I said quietly, standing to leave. The words seemed to echo in the sudden silence. My mother reached for my arm as I passed, but I pulled away. As I drove home through the Portland rain, I made a decision. I was done trying to maintain family harmony. They'd shown me who they were, and I needed to protect my son. The next phase of their plan became clear when I went into labor 2 weeks early. It was a Tuesday morning in May, and I was alone in my apartment when my water broke. I'd been so careful to keep my due date vague with my family, planning to have my friend Sarah from work as my support person. But when I called her, panicking as contractions rolled through me, she didn't answer. Neither did my backup, James from my prenatal class. In desperation, as the contractions grew stronger, I called an ambulance. Imagine my surprise when I arrived at the hospital to find my entire family already in the waiting room. Rebecca rushed forward as they wheeled me past, trying to follow me into the delivery room. "She's my birth partner," she announced to the nurses, who looked to me for confirmation. I had just enough breath between contractions to shake my head vigorously. "No," I gasped. "No one. I want no one in there." The next 10 hours were a blur of pain and determination. I'd never felt more alone or more powerful. With each contraction, I thought about why I was doing this, about the tiny life I was bringing into the world, about the strength I didn't know I possessed until I needed it. When they finally placed my son on my chest, all 6 pounds and 3 ounces of him, with a shock of dark hair and the tiniest fingers I'd ever seen, I understood with perfect clarity that I would do anything, face anyone, to protect him. I named him Joshua, after my grandfather who'd passed away when I was 15, the only family member who'd ever made me feel truly seen and valued. As I held him in those first precious moments, his eyes squinting against the bright hospital lights, I whispered promises to him. "I'll keep you safe," I told him. "No matter what, I'll keep you safe." But my family had other plans. Rebecca appeared in my recovery room the next morning, carrying an enormous bouquet of blue balloons and a designer diaper bag I recognized from her baby registry investigations. She approached the bassinet where Joshua slept, and I watched her face transform with a hunger that made my maternal instincts scream in alarm. "Can I hold him?" she asked, already reaching for him before I could answer. "Just for a minute, I want to meet my nephew." The way she said nephew sounded wrong, like she was trying out a word in a foreign language. But I was exhausted, hormonal, and trying to choose my battles. I nodded reluctantly, watching like a hawk as she lifted him with practiced ease, as if she'd been rehearsing this moment. "Hello, sweet boy," she cooed, settling into the visitor's chair with Joshua cradled against her chest. I'm your..." Aunt Becca, I'm going to take such good care of you. The pause before Aunt was deliberate. I was certain. She looked at him like she was memorizing his face, like she was already imagining first days of school and little league games and college graduations. When Joshua began to fuss, that newborn mewing that precedes a full cry, she didn't hand him back. Instead, she stood and began to pace, bouncing him gently, humming a lullaby I remembered from our childhood. He's hungry, I said, holding out my arms. But she kept pacing, kept humming. Maybe he just needs to be soothed, she suggested. You don't want to create bad habits by feeding him every time he cries. I felt my temper flare, the first spark of the mama bear instincts that would serve me well in the coming months. Give me my son, Rebecca. Now. Something in my tone must have penetrated her fantasy because she finally handed him over, though her fingers lingered on his blanket a moment too long. As I settled Joshua to nurse, grateful that despite everything, he latched easily. She watched with an intensity that made my skin crawl. The first 10 months of Joshua's life passed in a blur of sleepless nights, endless laundry, and a love so fierce it sometimes took my breath away. My family had retreated after the hospital confrontation, and I'd foolishly allowed myself to believe they'd accepted my decision. I threw myself into motherhood with everything I had. Mrs. Chen at the bookstore cafe was true to her word, setting up a small area in the back office where I could keep Joshua while I worked. The customers loved him, this quiet baby who rarely fussed and seemed content to watch the world with those serious dark eyes. I found my rhythm, exhausting as it was. Wake at 5 for the first feeding, shower while Joshua dozed in his bouncer, catch the 7:30 bus to work with him, strapped to my chest in a secondhand carrier. Work until 3, home for tummy time and pureed sweet potatoes and bath time. The sacred ritual of bedtime stories, even though he was too young to understand the words. I read him everything, from board books to chapters of the novel I was slowly writing during his naps. Some nights I fell asleep on the floor beside his crib, too tired to make it to my own bed 10 feet away. The isolation was the hardest part. My work friends tried to include me, but I could rarely afford babysitters for evening gatherings, and bringing a baby to a bar wasn't exactly practical. I joined a mommy group at the library, but felt out of place among the older, married women discussing their husbands and mortgage rates. Online forums became my lifeline, anonymous spaces where I could ask questions about sleep regression and teething without judgment. It was during a particularly difficult week when Joshua had been up every hour with what I thought was just teething pain that I finally broke down and called my mother. I needed help, even if it came with strings attached. She arrived within an hour, taking in my unwashed hair and the dark circles under my eyes with a mixture of concern and something else, something like satisfaction. She helped, I'll give her that. She held Joshua while I took my first hot shower in days, changed his diaper with the efficiency of someone who'd raised 3 children, even made me a sandwich and insisted I eat it. But as the afternoon wore on, I noticed things. The way she kept calling Joshua my angel instead of using his name. The photos she was taking with her phone, dozens of them, from every angle. The way she studied his features like she was looking for resemblances. He has the Walker nose, she announced, referring to her side of the family. And those eyes, definitely Rebecca's eyes, don't you think? I wanted to scream that he had my eyes, that every part of him was mine, but I was too tired to argue. When she left that evening, after extracting a promise that I'd let them visit more often, I felt relieved and uneasy in equal measure. The visits increased after that. My parents would drop by with groceries and offers to babysit. Rebecca would appear with expensive toys and clothes that Joshua would outgrow before wearing. Even Daniel started coming around, though he seemed genuinely interested in being an uncle rather than pursuing any agenda. He'd sit on my floor and make ridiculous faces until Joshua giggled, that baby belly laugh that could brighten even my darkest days. I should have known the peace wouldn't last. I should have been preparing for what came next instead of allowing myself to be lulled by their apparent acceptance. But I was so tired, so overwhelmed with the daily marathon of single motherhood that I let my guard down. I accepted their help because I needed it, even as a voice in the back of my mind whispered warnings I chose to ignore. Everything changed the day of Joshua's autism diagnosis. He was 10 months old, and I'd been growing concerned about his development. He wasn't responding to his name consistently, avoided eye contact more than seemed typical, and had begun exhibiting repetitive behaviors that the pediatrician initially dismissed as personality quirks. But I knew my son, knew him in the bone-deep way that mothers know their children, and I pushed for an evaluation. The developmental pediatrician was kind but direct. Joshua showed several markers for autism spectrum disorder, though she emphasized that early intervention could make a tremendous difference. She handed me pamphlets about therapy services, support groups, resources I'd need to navigate this unexpected journey. I sat in that sterile office, Joshua contentedly stacking blocks in the corner, and felt the ground shift beneath me, not because I loved him any less, but because I knew instinctively that this diagnosis would change everything, that the path ahead would be even harder than I'd imagined. I made the mistake of telling my family. I thought naively that they'd rally around us, that this challenge might even bring us closer together. Instead, I'd handed them the ammunition they'd been looking for. Rebecca appeared at my apartment the very next morning, armed with a stack of printed articles about the costs of autism therapy. She spread them across my kitchen table like evidence in a court case, highlighting relevant passages with fluorescent yellow marker. Applied behavior analysis, 40 hours a week recommended, up to $70,000 a year. Speech therapy, occupational therapy, special education services. The numbers swam before my eyes, each one a reminder of everything I couldn't provide. "You can barely afford daycare, Emma," she said, her voice gentle but relentless. "How are you going to manage this? Joshua needs specialized care, early intervention, the best therapists. Michael and I have already researched the top programs in the state. We could get him enrolled immediately. We have the resources to give him every possible advantage." I held Joshua closer, feeling his weight against my chest, his fingers tangled in my hair. "We'll figure it out," I said, though doubt gnawed at my conviction. "There are state programs, sliding scale payments. I'll take on more hours at work, find a second job if I have to." Rebecca's expression softened into something that might have been pity. "And when will you see him, Emma? When you're working 2 jobs to pay for therapy you can't afford? Who's going to take him to appointments? Who's going to work with him at home on the skills he needs to develop? You're talking about sacrificing his critical early intervention period because of your pride." The worst part was that she wasn't entirely wrong. I'd spent the night after the diagnosis researching, and the reality was overwhelming. Waitlists found for state-funded programs were months long. Private therapy costs would decimate my already precarious budget. But I'd also read success stories, accounts from parents who'd navigated similar challenges with far fewer resources than I had. It would be hard, maybe the hardest thing I'd ever do, but it was possible. "I'm his mother," I said, lifting my chin. "That counts for something. It counts for everything. And I'll find a way. I always do." But even as I spoke, I saw the glance Rebecca exchanged with my mother, who'd been suspiciously quiet during this exchange. They'd already decided I'd fail. They were just waiting for me to realize it too. The sabotage started subtly. I'd arrive at therapy appointments to find they'd been mysteriously canceled. The therapist would apologize, saying someone had called claiming to be me, saying we needed to reschedule due to a family emergency. Wait lists I'd been on for months would somehow lose my application. Support groups I tried to join would be full, despite websites showing openings. Then came the documentation phase. My family began showing up unannounced, always at the worst possible moments. When Joshua had meltdowns, which became more frequent as he struggled to communicate his needs, Rebecca or my mother would appear with their phones out, recording everything. They'd offer to help while simultaneously capturing every moment of my frustration, every time I cried from exhaustion, every instance where I was less than the perfect mother. I tried to set boundaries, changed at the locks, stopped answering their calls, but they were relentless. Rebecca had taken a leave of absence from her job, dedicating herself full-time to what I realized was an orchestrated campaign to prove my unfitness as a mother. She volunteered at Joshua's daycare, befriending the staff, planting seeds of concern about my parenting. She joined online autism support groups, posting thinly veiled questions about what to do when you see a child not getting proper care. The breaking point came when I needed their help. I hated myself for it, but I was scheduled to work a double shift. My usual babysitter had the flu, and I couldn't afford to lose the job. With no other options, I swallowed my pride and asked Rebecca to watch Joshua for the day. She agreed immediately, too eagerly, promising to follow all his routines, respect his sensory needs, keep to the schedule that helped him feel secure. I should have known better. I should have called in sick, quit my job, done anything other than leave my vulnerable son with someone I knew wanted to take him from me. But desperation makes us rationalize the unthinkable. And I convinced myself that not even Rebecca would use babysitting as a weapon. I was 3 hours into my shift when my phone exploded with calls from my apartment building manager. The police were at my unit, responding to a report of an abandoned child. My blood turned to ice as I ran from the cafe, not even stopping to clock out, knowing with horrible certainty what had happened. The scene at my apartment was a nightmare. Two police officers stood outside my door, Rebecca beside them with Joshua in her arms, my mother playing the role of concerned grandmother to perfection. They'd crafted a story about arriving for a scheduled visit to find Joshua alone and crying. The building manager confirmed that no one had answered when he knocked, though Rebecca had a key and had let herself in. I tried to explain, but my words came out jumbled, panicked. The officers looked at me with a mixture of suspicion and pity, this young mother who couldn't even keep her story straight. Rebecca had already shown them her credentials, mentioned her husband's position in the legal community, established herself as the responsible adult in this scenario. In contrast, I looked exactly like what I was. A terrified, exhausted single mother who'd made the mistake of trusting the wrong people. The officers let me take Joshua after Rebecca magnanimously vouched for me, saying she was sure it was just a misunderstanding, that I was doing my best under difficult circumstances. The condescension in her voice made me want to scream, but I bit my tongue, focused on getting Joshua back in my arms where he belonged. As they all finally left, Rebecca paused at my door. "This is what I mean, Emma," she whispered, quiet enough that only I could hear. "You can't even arrange proper childcare. What happens when he needs more than you can give? Just think about what's best for him, please." That night, after Joshua was finally asleep, I sat in the dark and made a decision. They wanted to play dirty? Fine, but I wouldn't go down without a fight. I'd been documenting too, though I hadn't realized it would become evidence in a war for my son. Every text message, every email, every voicemail, the recordings I'd made of Rebecca admitting she'd been planning this since before Joshua was born. The witnesses who'd seen her bizarre behavior at medical appointments, the paper trail showing the mysterious cancellations and interferences with his therapy. But I needed more. I needed to be smarter, more strategic. I couldn't match their resources, but I had something they didn't: the fierce, primal love of a mother protecting her child, and I had technology on my side. I invested in a nanny cam, hidden in Joshua's favorite stuffed elephant. I recorded every interaction, every visit, building a cache of evidence that showed the truth. How Rebecca would try to confuse Joshua by having him call her mama. How she'd undermine my parenting, telling him he didn't have to follow my rules. How my mother would stage situations to create meltdowns, then document his distress while offering no comfort. The custody petition arrived on a Thursday. I'd just gotten Joshua down for his afternoon nap when the process server knocked. The stack of papers was thick, professionally bound, the product of what must have been weeks of preparation. Michael had built a comprehensive case painting me as an unfit mother unable to meet the special needs of my child. They cited the police visit, included statements from neighbors about Joshua's crying, documented every perceived failing with the thoroughness of a prosecutor building a death penalty case. But the worst part was seeing Tyler's signature on the supporting documents. My ex, who'd wanted nothing to do with Joshua, who'd signed away his rights for $500 and a clean conscience, had suddenly developed paternal concern. His affidavit claimed I'd denied him access to his son, that he'd wanted to be involved but I'd refused out of spite. The lies were so blatant, so easily disproven, that I knew they must have paid him well for his cooperation. The court date was set for 3 weeks out. 3 weeks to find a lawyer I couldn't afford, to build a defense against a team of legal professionals, to prove I deserved to keep my own son. I sold everything I could: my grandmother's jewelry, the few electronics I owned, even plasma twice a week, despite the way it left me dizzy and weak. Every dollar went toward retaining Lisa Patel, a family law attorney who'd been recommended by a women's shelter advocate. Lisa was young, maybe only 5 years older than me, but she had a fierceness in her eyes that gave me hope. She reviewed my evidence, asked hard questions, made me relive every painful moment of the past year. "This is good," she said, scrolling through the nanny cam footage on my laptop. "But we need more. They're going to come at you hard, claim you're paranoid, that you're alienating Joshua from loving family members who just want to help. We need to show a pattern of deliberate interference and manipulation." So we worked. Every spare moment was spent building our case. I reached out to the therapists whose appointments had been canceled, got written statements about the suspicious nature of the cancellations. Joshua's pediatrician, Dr. Sarah Martinez, agreed to testify about his progress under my care, how I'd been proactive in seeking early intervention, how I never missed an appointment despite not having a car and relying on public transportation. The daycare workers, once suspicious of me thanks to Rebecca's influence, began to see through her facade when she became increasingly aggressive about gaining access to Joshua outside of authorized pickup times. One teacher, Maria, pulled me aside to warn me that Rebecca had been asking strange questions about Joshua's daily routine about whether I ever seemed impaired or negligent. When Maria refused to engage in gossip, Rebecca had threatened to have her fired. That threat was Maria's breaking point, and she agreed to provide a statement for our case. But the real breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Daniel, my younger brother, showed up at my apartment one evening looking haggard. "I have to tell you something," he said, glancing around nervously as if expecting our parents to materialize from the shadows. "They're planning something for the court date." I overheard Mom and Rebecca talking. "They're going to claim you're using drugs, that you've been stealing medication from Rebecca's medicine cabinet when you visit." I stared at him, trying to process this new low. "But I haven't been to their house in months," I protested. "They know that." He nodded miserably. "They're going to say you broke in. Rebecca's been leaving her anxiety medication in visible places, then reporting it missing. They filed police reports, Emma. They're creating a paper trail. They've even got some doctor willing to say your behavior is consistent with substance abuse. I don't know how much they're paying him, but Mom mentioned it would be worth it when they get custody." "Why are you telling me this?" I asked, searching his face for signs of deception. This felt too convenient, too much like a trap. But Daniel's eyes filled with tears, and suddenly he looked like my little brother again, the one who used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms. "Because what they're doing is wrong," he said simply. "And because I've watched Rebecca with Joshua when you're not around. She doesn't see him, not really. She sees the baby she never had, the life she thinks she deserves. She doesn't care about his autism, doesn't want to learn about sensory processing or communication strategies. She just wants a baby to dress up and show off. And I can't let them do that to my nephew, to you." Armed with this information, Lisa and I adjusted our strategy. We couldn't prevent them from making their accusations, but we could be prepared to counter them. I submitted to a voluntary drug test, clean as expected. I provided character references from employers, neighbors, the parents in my library playgroup. I documented every penny spent on Joshua's care, every therapy session attended, every milestone reached despite the challenges. The morning of the court hearing, I dressed carefully in my only suit, a thrift store find that Lisa had helped me alter to fit properly. Joshua was with Sarah from work, the only person I trusted to keep him safe while I fought for our future. As I approached the courthouse, I saw them gathered on the steps like an army preparing for battle. Rebecca in her designer suit, Michael with his team of associate attorneys, my parents looking grave and respectable, even Tyler in an ill-fitting blazer, avoiding eye contact. Inside the courtroom, the initial proceedings went exactly as Lisa had predicted. Michael painted a picture of a young woman in over her head, too proud to accept help from loving family members who only wanted what was best for the child. He presented the police report from the abandonment incident, the statements from neighbors, the allegedly missing medication. He even had a child development expert testify about the importance of early intervention for autism and the resources required to provide appropriate care. Rebecca took the stand with perfectly timed tears, describing her years of infertility, her love for her nephew, her desperate desire to provide him with every advantage. She spoke about the nursery she'd prepared, the therapist she'd already interviewed, the special needs preschool with a spot reserved whenever Joshua was ready. She painted herself as a savior, ready to rescue a child from the well-meaning but inadequate care of his young mother. When it was our turn, Lisa systematically dismantled their case. She presented the evidence of sabotage, the recordings of Rebecca referring to Joshua as her son, the proof that I'd been proactive in seeking services despite active interference. She had me take the stand, and I told my truth, voice shaking at first but growing stronger as I spoke about my son, about the bond between us, about the progress he'd made under my care. But the moment that changed everything came when Lisa played a particular piece of Nanny cam footage. In it, Rebecca was alone with Joshua during one of her babysitting sessions. He was having a meltdown, overwhelmed by something, and instead of using any of the calming techniques I'd shown her, she grabbed him roughly by the shoulders and shook him, shouting, "Stop it! Just stop it! You're going to be normal if it kills me." The courtroom went silent. Even Michael looked shocked, turning to stare at his wife. Rebecca's face had gone white, her carefully constructed image crumbling in real time. The judge leaned forward, studying the footage with intense focus. But that wasn't the end of it. Lisa had one more card to play. She called Maria from the daycare to testify, but Maria didn't come alone. She brought Stephanie, another teacher who'd been documenting Rebecca's increasingly erratic behavior. Stephanie testified that she'd seen Rebecca attempting to take Joshua from the center without authorization. claiming family emergency when no such emergency existed. She'd reported it to the center director, who'd implemented additional security measures specifically because of Rebecca's attempts. Then came Dr. Martinez, who testified not just about my dedication as a mother, but about concerning comments Rebecca had made during appointments she'd attended without my permission. She's mentioned several times that Joshua would be better off in a home where his autism could be hidden, Dr. Martinez said carefully. She seemed to view his neurodivergence as something shameful to be fixed rather than part of who he is. In my professional opinion, that attitude could be severely detrimental to his development and self-esteem. Tyler's testimony, which they'd clearly counted on as a crucial element, fell apart under Lisa's cross-examination. She presented the signed relinquishment of his parental rights, the contemporaneous text messages where he'd threatened me if I didn't get an abortion, the bank records showing a suspicious deposit of $10,000 just days before he'd agreed to testify. By the time she was done, he'd admitted to being paid for his cooperation and fled the courtroom before he could be charged with perjury. The judge called a recess, and those 20 minutes felt like hours. I sat in the hallway, hands clenched so tightly my nails left crescents in my palms. Lisa sat beside me, occasionally murmuring reassurances I couldn't quite process. Down the hall, I could see my family huddled with their legal team, Rebecca gesticulating wildly while Michael tried to calm her. When we returned to the courtroom, the judge's expression was stern. She addressed Rebecca directly, her words careful but damning. "Mrs. Henderson, this court has serious concerns about your behavior toward this child and his mother. The evidence presented suggests a pattern of harassment, interference with medical care, and attempted alienation that rises to the level of emotional abuse. Furthermore, your recorded treatment of the child during a moment of distress shows a fundamental lack of understanding of his needs." She turned to my parents next. "Mr. and Mrs. Walker, your participation in this scheme is equally troubling. Using the legal system to attempt to separate a fit mother from her child based on financial circumstances and your daughter's personal desires is reprehensible. This court finds no evidence that Emma Walker is anything other than a devoted, capable mother doing her best under challenging circumstances." The custody petition was dismissed with prejudice, meaning they couldn't refile the same claims. But more than that, the judge issued a restraining order preventing my family from contacting Joshua or me without court supervision. She ordered them to pay my legal fees and suggested that criminal charges for harassment and filing false reports might be forthcoming. Rebecca broke down completely, screaming that I was destroying her life, that I was selfish and cruel and would regret this. It took 3 bailiffs to remove her from the courtroom as she fought and clawed. Her perfect image shattered beyond repair. My mother followed, weeping dramatically, while my father walked out without a backward glance. His disappointment in the failure of their plan evident in every rigid line of his body. As I left the courthouse, Daniel caught up with me on the steps. "I'm sorry," he said quietly, "for all of it. For not speaking up sooner, for letting it get this far. I wanted to be angry with him, but I was too emotionally drained. Maybe someday we could rebuild some kind of relationship, but not now, not when the wounds were so fresh." I picked up Joshua from Sarah's house, holding him so tightly he squirmed in protest. We went home to our little studio apartment that suddenly felt like a palace because it was ours. Because we were safe, because we were together. That night as I rocked him to sleep, I sang the lullabies my grandmother used to sing to me, the ones that spoke of love and protection and the fierce bonds that hold us together. But our story doesn't end there. 6 months passed in relative peace. Joshua began making remarkable progress with his therapies, which I could finally access without interference. He started using sign language to communicate, his frustration decreasing as he found ways to express his needs. The autism support group I joined became a lifeline full of parents who understood the unique joys and challenges of raising neurodivergent children. For the first time since his diagnosis, I felt hopeful about our future. I'd even started dating again, tentatively, a fellow single parent named Marcus, whom I'd met at the library story time. He had a daughter with Down syndrome, and he understood without explanation why I needed to take things slowly, why trust was hard to come by. Joshua liked him, which mattered more than anything, and Lily, his daughter, was gentle and patient with Joshua in the way that children who know difference often are with each other. Life had found a rhythm, a new normal that felt sustainable and even occasionally joyful. I was promoted to assistant manager at the bookstore cafe with a raise that meant I could afford a better apartment, one with a separate bedroom for Joshua. We were planning the move, had started packing boxes, when everything shattered again. It was a Wednesday evening. Marcus and I had taken the kids to a sensory-friendly movie screening, a monthly event at a local theater that kept the lights dimmed and the sound lower, where kids could move around and vocalize without judgment. It had been a good day. Joshua had stayed engaged with the movie, had even initiated play with another child in the lobby afterward. These small victories felt enormous, each one proof that with the right support and understanding, he was thriving. We just returned to my apartment when I noticed the door was slightly ajar. My blood ran cold. I'd locked it, I always locked it, had developed an almost obsessive habit of checking and double-checking since the court case. Marcus immediately stepped forward, putting himself between the door and the children. "Let me," he said quietly, pulling out his phone to dial 911. But before he could complete the call, the door swung open from the inside. Rebecca stood there, but she was barely recognizable as the polished suburban housewife I'd known. Her hair was disheveled, her clothes wrinkled, her makeup smeared as if she'd been crying. In her arms, she held a baby doll, one of those realistic ones that look almost alive in dim light. She was swaying slightly, humming the same lullaby she'd sung to Joshua in the hospital. "There you are, sweetheart," she cooed, but she wasn't looking at Joshua. She was looking at the doll, adjusting its blanket with tender care. "Mama's here now. I've been looking everywhere for you. Those bad people tried to keep us apart, but I found you. I'll always find you." Marcus had completed his 911 call, speaking quietly and urgently while keeping himself positioned as a barrier. I pulled both children behind me, my heart hammering as I tried to process what I was seeing. "Rebecca," I said carefully, not wanting to escalate whatever breakdown she was experiencing. "You can't be here. There's a restraining order. You need to leave." She looked up then, and her eyes were empty of recognition. She tilted her head, studying me as if I were a stranger. "I don't know you," she said simply, "but you have my baby. I can hear him. He needs me. He's crying for his mama." She started moving toward us, still clutching the doll, and that's when I noticed the knife in her other hand, held casually as if she'd forgotten it was there. Police sirens were already approaching, but those seconds stretched endlessly. Marcus managed to get the kids into the bathroom, locking the door behind them while I faced my sister. The sister who'd once braided my hair and shared secrets under blanket forts. The sister who'd been broken by her own unfulfilled dreams until she'd convinced herself she could steal mine. "Rebecca, it's me. It's Emma. That's a doll you're holding, not a real baby. Joshua is my son. You need to put the knife down before someone gets hurt." I kept my voice steady, drawing on reserves of calm I didn't know I possessed. But she just smiled, that same calculating smile from Thanksgiving dinner all those months ago. "You're lying," she said conversationally. "Everyone lies. They said I couldn't have a baby, but look, here he is. Perfect and whole and mine. They tried to take him, gave him to some girl who can't even take care of herself. But I fixed it. I'm always fixing things. That's what I do. I fix things." The police arrived then, flooding into the small apartment with overwhelming force. Rebecca didn't resist when they disarmed her, didn't seem to even notice them. She kept humming to the doll, lost in whatever alternate reality her mind had constructed to cope with her losses. As they led her away, she called back over her shoulder, "Don't worry, baby. Mama will be back soon. I promise." The aftermath was surreal. Investigators found that Rebecca had been living in her car for weeks, having been kicked out by Michael after exhibiting increasingly erratic behavior following the court case. He'd tried to get her help, but she'd refused, convinced that everyone was conspiring to keep her from her baby. She'd been surviving on delusions and determination, stalking my social media through fake accounts, following us to learn our routines, waiting for the perfect moment to reclaim what her fractured mind believed was hers. My parents, when contacted by police, admitted they'd been aware of Rebecca's deteriorating mental state but had chosen to handle it privately to avoid scandal. They'd been more concerned with their reputation than with getting their daughter help or warning me about the potential danger. The betrayal felt fresh all over again, a wound that might never fully heal. Rebecca was hospitalized for psychiatric evaluation and eventually transferred to a long-term treatment facility. The diagnosis was severe postpartum psychosis, though she'd never given birth. The psychiatrist explained it was rare but possible, triggered by the intense grief of infertility combined with the stress of the failed custody battle. Her mind had simply broken under the weight of wanting something so desperately that could never be hers. I struggled with complicated feelings in the weeks that followed. Anger at what she'd put us through. Pity for the pain that had driven her to such extremes. Guilt that I'd gotten the one thing she'd wanted most. fear that she might someday be released and come for us again. The restraining order was extended indefinitely, but paper offers little protection against someone who's lost touch with reality. Marcus was incredible through it all, never pushing for more than I could give, understanding when I needed to process everything in therapy before moving forward with our relationship. He'd seen me at my most vulnerable, had literally helped protect my child from danger, and somehow still wanted to be part of our lives. It gave me hope that maybe someday I could trust again fully. The promised criminal charges against my family finally materialized. Tyler pled guilty to perjury and received probation. My parents were charged with conspiracy and harassment, though their expensive lawyers negotiated it down to misdemeanors with community service. The real punishment was social. Their carefully maintained position in Portland society crumbled when the details became public. My mother's charity committees quietly suggested she step down. My father's golf club members found excuses to avoid him. They'd sacrifice their relationship with their daughter and grandson for a scheme that cost them everything they'd valued. Daniel and I slowly began rebuilding our relationship. He went to therapy, working through his guilt over his complicity through silence. He asked for supervised visits with Joshua, wanting to be the uncle he should have been from the beginning. Watching him patiently work to earn Joshua's trust, learning about autism to better support his nephew, I began to forgive. Not forget, but forgive. A year after Rebecca's breakdown, I received a letter from her treatment facility. The doctor said she'd specifically requested it be sent, that it was part of her therapeutic process. I stared at the envelope for days before finding the courage to open it. Her handwriting was shaky but recognizable. "Emma," it began, "I'm told I need to make amends, though I barely remember many of the things they say I did. The medication helps me think clearly, but it also means confronting the monster I became. I don't expect forgiveness. I wouldn't forgive me. But I need you to know that somewhere under the sickness and obsession, I loved you. I loved Joshua. I just loved the idea of motherhood more, and it poisoned everything good in my life. I'm sorry seems inadequate, but it's all I have. Take care of your son, love him in all the ways I couldn't. Be the mother I'll never be. Rebecca." I cried reading it, grieving for the sister I'd lost long before her hospitalization, for the relationship we might have had in another life where fertility came easier or mattered less. I didn't write back. Some wounds go too deep for words to heal. But I kept the letter, evidence that somewhere inside the person who'd tried to destroy my life was still the sister who'd once held my hand during thunderstorms. Joshua is 5 now, thriving in a specialized preschool that celebrates neurodiversity rather than trying to fix it. He communicates through a combination of sign language, picture cards, and an increasing vocabulary of spoken words. He loves trains with an intensity that makes me smile, can identify every type of locomotive in his picture books, builds elaborate track systems that snake through our new 2-bedroom apartment. His laughter, when it comes, is the most beautiful sound in the world. Marcus and I married last spring in a small ceremony in the park where we'd had our first official date. Joshua was the ring bearer, with Lily as flower girl, both of them more interested in the cake than the ceremony, but perfect in their joyful distraction. My chosen family surrounded us: Sarah from work, Maria from the daycare, Lisa the lawyer who'd become a friend, the parents from our support group who understood that family isn't always about blood. Daniel was there too, taking photos with an old film camera, capturing moments I'd actually want to remember. He's working to earn his place in our lives, understanding it's a privilege, not a right. My parents weren't invited. They send cards on holidays, checks on Joshua's birthday that I deposit into his therapy fund without acknowledgement. Maybe someday we'll find a path forward, but that day isn't today. I still have nightmares sometimes. I'll wake in a cold sweat, certain I heard the door opening, certain someone's trying to take my son. On those nights, I check the locks, peek into Joshua's room where he sleeps surrounded by his beloved trains, remind myself that we're safe, that we survived, that we're building a life filled with love and understanding and acceptance of who Joshua is, not who anyone else wanted him to be. The novel I'd been writing in fragments during Joshua's baby naps finally found its ending. It's fiction, technically, about a mother who fights mythical creatures to protect her child. But anyone who knows our story can read between the lines, can see the real monsters were human, were family, were the people who should have loved us best but loved their own dreams more. It found a small publisher. Won't make us rich, but seeing my name on the cover, Emma Walker, felt like reclaiming something that had been taken from me. Sometimes, when Joshua and I are at the park, I'll see families that look perfect from the outside. Parents who seem to have it all together, Children who hit every milestone exactly on time, grandparents who dote without agenda. I used to feel envy, that sharp ache of wondering why that couldn't be us. But now I just feel grateful for the family we've built, imperfect and hard-won, and entirely ours. Joshua doesn't know the full story yet. Someday, when he's older, when he can understand nuance and complexity, I'll tell him about the people who wanted him for the wrong reasons, who saw him as a prize to be won rather than a person to be loved. But for now, he knows only that he is wanted, is loved, is perfect exactly as he is. He knows that Mama will always fight for him, will always see him, will always choose him over anyone else's comfort or expectations. And that's enough, more than enough. It's everything. Looking back, I sometimes wonder what would have happened if I'd given in, if I'd let them convince me I wasn't enough, that Joshua needed more than a young single mother could provide. I think about the life he might have had with Rebecca and Michael, the therapies designed to make him appear normal rather than help him thrive as himself. The shame of being different in a family that valued appearance over authenticity. I think about the mother I might have become, broken by loss and regret, forever wondering about the child I gave away. Instead, I became someone I never expected to be, fierce and protective and absolutely certain of my worth as a mother. Joshua made me brave in ways I'd never imagined possible. His existence gave me the strength to stand against my entire family, to build a life from scratch, to redefine what love and support really mean. He saved me as much as I saved him, though he'll probably never know it. The statistics say we should have failed. Young single mothers with special needs children face impossible odds. But statistics don't account for the power of determination, for the networks of support that exist outside traditional family structures, for the way a child's laugh can sustain you through the darkest nights. They don't measure the small victories. The first successful grocery trip without a meltdown, the first friend made at the playground, the first time your child signs I love you and means it with their whole being. We're not a success story in the traditional sense. We'll probably always struggle financially. Joshua will always be autistic, will always need support and understanding to navigate a world not built for minds like his. I'll always carry the scars of betrayal, will always have to work harder than most to trust, to let people close. But we're happy in ways that matter more than any metric could measure. Sometimes Rebecca writes from the facility. The letters go unopened into a box in my closet, a boundary I maintain for my own sanity. Her doctors say she's making progress, might someday be stable enough for supervised release. The thought terrifies me, but I've learned to live with fear, to not let it control our lives. We have plans in place, safety measures, a community that would rally around us if needed. We're not victims anymore, we're survivors. This Thanksgiving will be different. Instead of my family's formal dining room with its perfectly polished silver and underlying tensions, we'll gather at Marcus's sister's house. It's chaotic there, with 5 kids and 2 dogs and a kitchen too small for the number of people who want to help cook. But it's real in all the ways my childhood holidays weren't. No one cares if Joshua eats only white foods or needs to take breaks in a quiet room. No one suggests that Lily would be better off with parents who could give her more material advantages. No one looks at our cobbled-together family with anything but warmth. I've learned that family isn't about shared DNA or obligation or maintaining appearances. It's about choosing each other again and again, especially when it's hard. It's about seeing each other fully and loving not despite the differences, but because of them. It's about protecting the vulnerable and celebrating the small victories, and knowing that love isn't measured by what you can provide, but by how fiercely you show up. Joshua is stirring in the next room, his morning sounds filtering through the apartment. Soon he'll pad out in his train pajamas, signing breakfast with one hand while clutching his favorite engine with the other. We'll start our day with the routine that keeps him grounded. First juice, then cereal in the blue bowl, then getting dressed in clothes he chose the night before. Marcus will make coffee while Lily chatters about her plans for the day. It's ordinary and beautiful and nothing like the life I imagined at 22, scared and pregnant and alone. It's better, so much better, because it's real, it's ours, and no one can take it away from us. We fought for this life, bled for it, almost lost everything protecting it. But we won. Not in court, though that mattered. We won the right to define ourselves, to exist as we are, to love without conditions or expectations. We won the freedom to be a perfectly imperfect family, bound by choice and strengthened by challenge. And that victory, that's worth every single battle we had to fight to get here.